Okay, so today I sit in this court to deliver judgment in criminal case filed at the High Court in Nairobi, being High Court criminal case number 51 of 2018. The Republic is the prosecutor in this matter. Joseph Kuria Irungu alias Joey is the first accused person, and Jacqueline Wanjiru Maribe is the second accused person. I will give a factual background to this matter just to set us going and for ease of understanding. The two accused persons are jointly charged with the offense of murder. That is an offense established under Section 203 of our Penal Code, Cap 63 of the laws of this country, and that section is usually generally read together with Section 204 of the Code. May I request that all our phones, so that I don't get distracted, be switched off kindly? Thank you. So the particulars of the offense the two accused persons are charged with are that on the night of 19th of September in the year 2018, at unknown time at Lamuria Gardens Apartment, Kitale Lane off Dennis Street Road, in Kimani area within Nairobi County, jointly with others who are not before the court, they murdered one Monica Kimani. The information and/or the charge was read to each accused person, and they entered a plea of not guilty, and the case proceeded to full hearing. The prosecution called a total of 35 witnesses, whereas each accused person offered their defense. The first accused person offering his defense through a sworn statement, and the second accused person opting to defend herself through an unsworn statement. None of them called an additional defense witness. The prosecution case is that the deceased person was at the time of her demise residing in Juba, South Sudan. She was working as a managing director of a company which was a family business company known as Millport General Trading Company Limited, which was situated and/or operating in Juba, South Sudan. According to the evidence that I have been able to establish from the court record, and more specifically the evidence of PW9, the security manager at Kenya Airways, the deceased departed from Juba on the 19th day of September 2018 at 3:58 p.m. on a flight KQ 353 to Nairobi, and arrived at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport at 5:45 p.m. The court was given the benefit of the passenger manifest, and it indicated that the deceased or the material debt used a passport number CE034168, and her ticket number was 706200860,623. She sat on seat number 28A. In addition to that evidence, the court had the benefit of the evidence of PW18, Teddy Mugambi Kiaria, who is the head of surveillance at the Kenya Airport Authority. Her testimony to the court was that she received a request from the Director of Criminal Investigations to provide CCTV footage of the movements of the deceased person on the material debt. He then went and made an observation on the same in the company of the investigating officer, and it was revealed that when the deceased alighted from the flight, it was at 17:38:19 hours. And by 17:41 hours, she was at the immigration desk. She went to the baggage hall, picked her luggage, and exited towards the international airport stage by 17:51, 10 hours. The evidence of Okech Otieno John, who testified as prosecution witness number 6, is to the effect that he operates a taxi. He received a request from the deceased person. He responded positively, and that was about 6 p.m. He picked her up from the stage using his taxi registration number KCQ 399C Nissan Wing Road and dropped at the destination, which was Dennis Street Road, Kitale Lane. As is expected, he was paid his dues and left. The witness indicated that before they go to Dennis Street, the deceased called a border rider whom she met at Nyayo Stadium, according to his evidence, and handed over an envelope to him. According to him, their time of arrival at Lamuria Gardens was about 7 p.m. And as I've already said, he was paid and left. The evidence of the prosecution protected witness number 3A is the guard at Lamuria Gardens. And his evidence is that when the deceased arrived at Lamuria Gardens, she picked her house keys and her laundry, which had been left at the sentry house by the person who was working in her house in the day, and they were left with the day guard. It is his evidence that after she picked those items, she proceeded to apartment, which was apartment number A8. It is the prosecution case. Thereafter, the deceased was visited by 4 people on that night. According to that protected witness, PW3A, the first visitor whom we had the benefit to allow to have access to the deceased house arrived at about 8 p.m. He arrived in a taxi, and he was a male person. He was dressed in a white kanzu, a gray jacket, and a maroon cap. Upon being asked to identify himself, he identified himself as Haron and gave out an identity card in the name of Dominic Becerra Haron. His request was to be allowed to go to the deceased house. The guard's evidence is that they called the deceased to seek for authority to allow the visitor, or otherwise, they were given authority, they allowed the visitor, and the visitor proceeded to the deceased house. The next person who was in the deceased house on the material night is PW7, Lee Owen. His evidence is that he arrived in the deceased house at about 9:15 p.m. He had gone to the deceased house, having met the deceased earlier, having had a discussion with her, and he was going to pick documents from the deceased. Owen testified that when he got to the deceased's house, he found the deceased in the company of 2 male persons. One was Mr. Waridi, a neighbor of the deceased person, and an occupant of apartment number A9. A neighbor and an occupant of house apartment A9. The second person whom Owen found in the deceased house was introduced to him as Joe, a security officer with Interpol and Office of the President. And so, as I've indicated, the evidence reveals 4 people visited the deceased on the material night. At this point, we are at 3 persons: Mr. Waridi, a neighbor, Mr. Owen, PW7, and one who was introduced as Joe and who was cleared at the main gate as Dominic Bisera Haron. Anton Kariuki Kaka, PW16, testified that he visited the the deceased person, my apologies, on the material night. His evidence is that he did not gain access to the deceased house as the deceased opted to meet him at the parking area. And the reason why the deceased opted to meet him at the parking area is because the deceased informed him that he was having guests in her house who included a guy from State House. And so their conversation was held and ended at the parking area. It was the evidence of Mr. Owen, PW7. There was a general talk as they sat in the deceased house. 3 gentlemen and the deceased. And that the first person who left the deceased house was the neighbor, Mr. Warid. It is evidence of Owen that he was the next person to leave the deceased house. And it is further evidence of Owen that by the time he left the house at about 10:40 p.m., he left the deceased in the company of the visitor who had been introduced as Joe. It is the evidence of PW3A, the protected witness, the guard at Lamuria Gardens, that the last person to leave the deceased house was Dominic Bisera Haron, who left at hours 23:21. And that after that visitor left, no one else went to the deceased house. The evidence of PW10, the brother of the deceased, George Kimani, is to the effect that the deceased who had traveled from Juba on 19th of September 2018 was scheduled to travel to Dubai the following day. But she had indicated to her mother that she would see her before she leaves. And so the family tried to reach her because she did not visit the mother. And so the brother's evidence is that since her calls were not being answered, he chose to go and check on her at her residence. He went to her house in the company of his girlfriend, and when they got to the deceased house, they couldn't access the house because the door was locked. And so they sought help from the caretaker at Lamuria Gardens. The caretaker testified as PW13, one by the name of Regan Irungu Buruku. It was his evidence that when the deceased brother sought for assistance to access the deceased house, he instructed the gardener, one by the name Stephen Wanjoy, who testified as prosecution witness number 14, to get a ladder, as they had discovered that the window and or door to the balcony was not completely closed. So the gardener got the ladder, got to the balcony, and managed to access the house. It was the evidence of the gardener that when he got into the house, he found the television was on, water was running in the bathroom, but there was no one in the sitting room or in the bedroom. He proceeded to the bathroom and found the deceased's body in the bathtub. There was a mobile phone next to it, and there was water running over the body from the telephone shower. It was his evidence, as of course would be expected. He went into shock and immediately notified the caretaker and the brother of the deceased, whom he had left outside the house. He then requested the door be broken so that they could gain access. That was done, and subsequently the matter was reported to the police. Among the officers who visited the scene is Corporal Jennifer Sirwa, number 75179, who testified as prosecution witness number 2. Her evidence was simple. She processed the scene, and she took a total of 50 photographs of the scene. Those photographs were taken from various points, indicating various areas and items, which included but not limited to the general view of Lamuria Gardens Apartment, closer view of Block A, where the apartment of the deceased was. There was evidence that there was a yellow bag whose contents were not disclosed, hanging on the door. Was a photograph to that effect. The sitting room, the bedroom, the personal effects were photographed, the body, and those photographs were produced in this court as evidence. After the photographs and the scene was processed, the deceased body was moved to Chiromo mortuary. Of course, as is expected, investigations commenced. And it revealed that several people had visited the deceased on that night. Those people became of interest to the investigators. And as that was going on, Walidi, the neighbor of the deceased person, is said to have notified the family members that he had been and was in the deceased house the night before. And he mentioned, and so did Owen, that he too was in the house, but they were in the company of one Joe. It is in evidence that the deceased brother, Kimani, knew of a person by the name of Joe, and he sought to establish from Owen, through a photograph given to him, whether that was the person who was in the deceased house, and Owen's answer was in the affirmative. Mr. Kimani testified that he knew Joe, as they were in college together at Kenya Polytechnic as far back as 2012. And that he knew that Joe was known to the sister of the deceased, and he knew that Joe had a fiancé who was in the media industry, and so he approached Joe for assistance to have the death publicized. It is the evidence of Kimani that when he approached Joe for assistance, Joe told him that he would get no assistance from the media, but opted to assist through his private company to deal with the matter. The investigations advanced. It was discovered that the first accused person had made a report at Langata police station to the effect that he had been involved in a shooting incident. And so the team that was investigating the murder case got an interest in that shooting incident report And eventually, a team from the Homicide Department, the Directorate of Criminal Investigation, took over the investigations of both the shooting and the murder incident. The investigations in this matter were led by PW 35 Chief Inspector Otieno. It was the evidence of Chief Inspector Otieno that in the course of investigating the shooting incident, they discovered that there were contradictory statements as to how the shooting occurred. With that as it were, back to the murder issue. The first accused person was arrested, subjected to an identification parade. It is the evidence of the prosecution that he was identified by 3 witnesses. Subsequently, the second accused person was also arrested. And according to the prosecution case, she was arrested because, 1, she was within the vicinity of the commission of the murder. According to the prosecution, the vehicle that was used in the commission of this offense was hers. According to the prosecution, she aided and abetted the first accused person by providing that vehicle. According to the prosecution evidence, she switched off her phone at the time when the offense was being committed. According to the prosecution case, she gave false information to the police about the shooting incident, and the intention was to divert their attention from investigating the murder charge. And finally, according to the police, she aided and abetted and or was aware of destruction of the evidence that will be used in the murder case through the burning of the items that were recovered, believed to have been the items used in the commission of the murder and eventually destroyed. In a nutshell, that was the prosecution case. At the